My name is Gabe Woolley. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm a teacher, a son, a brother, and an uncle. In 2018, my nephew, Elijah Woolley, at 14 months old, died unexpectedly in his crib. The Wagoner County officials descended upon the home of my parents in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and a story of an unexpected death from sudden infant death syndrome was taken and spun as a murder and child sexual abuse by Wagoner County officials. As a result, Clayton Woolley, at 5 years old, was taken from his home and never returned. This is a story of a justice system operating under the guise of guilty until proven innocent. This is a story of injustice, a lack of accountability. The purpose of this podcast is to raise awareness, hold accountability, and it is a call to action for citizens of Oklahoma and the United States for checks and balances in our systems. This is the Rescue Clayton podcast. So they lead you to this private room, tell you your lawyer's there, and that's a lie.
Right.
To get you alone, sit you in front of Dad's files of the accusations for him.
Right.
And then your lawyer shows up.
Yeah. And then the DA comes in shortly after that.
So this is the DA that is over Wagoner County, among other counties. Wagoner County, Oklahoma.
Yeah. So he's kind of the head of all of this. This whole situation.
The district attorney.
Yeah, the district attorney, right? So he's kind of the head honcho of like this whole situation.
Right.
This the person, really in charge at the end of the day. And he comes in and he kind of has a smug look and he looks at the case file and he kind of laughs. He's like, ha, and then he walks around and then he sits down across from me and my lawyer. So it's me, my lawyer, and the DA. And then it was kind of a weird thing because my lawyer had advised me to not talk to him. He said, I'll, do the talking.
Not to talk. You advised you not to talk to the district attorney.
Yeah. So basically the district attorney, there wasn't really much of a conversation. He was talking at us.
Right.
So we were just there to listen. That was kind of more of what it was.
But if you were to respond, you should say it to your lawyer sitting right next to you.
Yeah.
And your lawyer will decide to transfer that information to the person right in front of you.
Kind of, yeah. And in a way, but I didn't really listen to that. I kind of just spoke freely anyways because I have a tendency to not listen to my lawyers very well. So I kind of
cut that part out.
That's it. I mean, it got me this far. We didn't get the indictment, so that was a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's true.
My lawyer had advised me to stay on track as well in my interview at the grand jury proceeding and not go off track and be very direct and not try to defend my parents. But because I did, we didn't get the indictment, so I'm glad I didn't listen.
So you ended up kind of doing your own thing and defending your parents and simply being honest.
Right. Yeah. It's just saying the truth, and
you feel like that paid off.
Yeah. I mean, it did. So, but like in that meeting with the DA, right? We're in that meeting. He kind of just spent the whole time. It almost felt like he was trying to convince my lawyer that my parents were guilty.
Right.
And I think looking back on it, the reason why he was doing that, I think he was actually trying to convince me. Yeah. I think he was almost trying to break me because I was the youngest and try to convince me and reach my heart in this. And I think his process of why he called me to testify, because a grand jury proceeding, the prosecution's the only one that get to present. There's no defense.
Yeah, you don't get to defend yourself in a grand jury.
Right. So I think the reason why they called me was because they thought they could break me because I was the youngest.
Right.
And they thought that they'd be able to convince me of my parents' guilt to where I would be on their side.
Right.
Unfortunately, that was not true.
Right.
And I was on the side of truth. Right. So from that, he spent that whole time trying to convince my lawyer, but really it was trying to convince me through my lawyer.
And then what happened? So you see Dad's case file. Then eventually you, your lawyer, and the Wagoner County DA are all in the same room. Yeah. And some other interesting encounter had taken place during this meeting. Yeah. Before the grand jury trial started.
Right. Yeah. So he had basically, as he was trying to convince me and my lawyer of my parents' guilt. He was going through pictures of, like, there was pictures of the crime scene,
alleged
quote crime scene.
Yeah. Pictures of Elijah's body.
Yeah, it was pictures of Elijah's body and things like that. And of course, I didn't want to relive that.
Right.
And so he was rifling through them like this, and I could tell he was about to show them.
Right.
And so I said, hey, you can show those to my lawyer if you really want to, but I would like notice so I can turn away. So if you want to show them, whatever. But I just don't want to see them personally.
You made it clear you didn't want to see
them.
them.
Because like it's just emotional. I don't want to be emotional right now. And so he said, oh, sure thing. And then he continued to rifle through them. And then he went, oops. And he dropped them in front of me.
He spills them on the table in front of you intentionally.
Intentionally spilling in front of me. And he said, oops, like, very condescendingly.
Right.
And so he did that. And it was very clear that he did not care about the sensitivity of Elijah's life or the sanctity of that.
One thing that I notice about the patterns that I seem to be seeing now that as I become slightly more educated, but I'm not a lawyer, but just as a perspective from the inside of this and as a citizen, is that there's careless work being done out of Wagoner County and simply unprofessional. And these are officials that work in Oklahoma, Wagoner County, some live in Broken Arrow, are living in the cities and in the counties that they're supposed to be servants to the people, elected positions. And I've met these people. I've met the Wagoner County DA. I shook his hand. I asked him to help me get custody of my nephew. Told him I'm a teacher, and he has the typical nothing I can do about it type attitude. And we're standing there in his church in Broken Arrow, and I don't know someone's personal relationship with God. That's between them, but you are trying to pinpoint someone's character here.
Yeah.
And it's not being pinpointed as a good character.
Yeah, definitely not. And
based off of their behaviors that they choose, their choices that they make.
It made it very clear to me that he didn't care, that this was just a number. This was another case to get another increase in his conviction rate. Like that's what he cared about. So,
and to be clear, my understanding, and I'll have to look this up, but he is an elected position.
He is, yeah.
So Wagoner County citizens do have the authority and the power to vote for someone else.
Yeah, judges, sheriffs, and DAs. Those are all people that are voted in. So,
and the investigator, the original one that pressed charges, he is appointed by the sheriff.
Yeah.
So by extension, there is something the citizens could do about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So anyway, so that was my first encounter with the DA there, and that was when I was supposed to be testifying for the grand jury, but instead I ended up just having a one-on-one meeting where I was eventually actually in that meeting granted immunity. They offered me immunity. They said, if you testify at the grand jury proceeding, then we will give you immunity so you can never be personally charged.
Do you feel like that was because they felt like they were going to get what they wanted at the grand jury?
So
again, it feels like you're being used as a bargaining chip.
Yeah. I think the reason why they did that was because they thought that they could convince me of my parents' guilt and break me, and that I would actually work in their favor while testifying. And that's not what happened.
What was interesting is Desiree has had a similar experience off the record where someone on the prosecution side has essentially more directly with her, more so indirectly with you, believed that this did happen and us three children, me, you, and Desiree, are just brainwashed and are not willing to give our parents up for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that seemed to kind of be the notion.
Our honest opinions and our stories don't work in their favor.
Right. Yeah.
And we all have alibis and testimonies and character witnesses, most of which were ignored by the prosecution because it didn't work in their favor.
Right. Yeah. And so at that grand jury proceeding, so then what we ended up agreeing upon is I ended up, my lawyer worked out that immunity deal or whatever, which I didn't care about because I was like, I'm testifying no matter what. I want to testify.
Right.
Sorry.
You weren't afraid to tell the truth.
Yeah. No, I was like, I actually welcome the opportunity. I was like, I'm
But your lawyer probably, did they advise you to take immunity?
Yeah. They were like, you might as well take it. It doesn't hurt you in any way.
Right. Yeah.
So you might as well take it.
Right.
So anyways, I had to come back. It was a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
Or it was like a week or two later. I had to come back. And when I had to come back for was actually during my finals week at OSU. So this is going to be important for later. So I was taking a course called entomology at OSU, which is the study of bugs and how they affect our world.
Insects.
Study of insects and how they affect our world. And so the DA, he had to write me note for my professor
Right.
to say, hey, she has a legal matter to take care of. She has to be rescheduled to take this final. Because otherwise, I would
therefore, he is very aware of the specific class that you need exemption from.
Yeah.
And this is a class that studies the biology and the life and the purpose of insects, of bugs.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's aware of this. So that's important. And so he wrote me this note for my professor to get out of my final and all this stuff. And then I ended up coming back, and this was the big day. I'm actually going to be testifying in front of the grand jury.
Yeah.
So I come back with my lawyer, and I get sat in this room. And there's a room, and it's me and my lawyer sitting in chairs just like this in the front of the room.
Yeah.
And then there's like 8 tables on each side going all the way back. And then there's a podium at the very back. And the very back is an ADA who is sitting in the back, who is standing at the podium in the back.
Assistant
District Attorney.
District Attorney.
So she works for the DA.
Right. And these are still members out of Wagoner County,
Yes.
among other counties.
They're prosecutors.
Okay.
Yeah, for the prosecution in Wagoner County. So,
Right.
And then there's 2 jurors sat at each table, and there's more than a standard 12 jurors. I think there's like 18 or something. There's more in a grand jury.
There were 18.
Well, there's close to that. There's more people in a grand jury than there is in a standard jury.
Okay.
So it's more than 12. I didn't count exactly, but it was a lot. And then there's the DA and another ADA that are sitting in chairs in the very back. And they're not speaking, and they're not allowed to speak right then during my testimony, just the one ADA that's questioning me. So, get sworn in, all that. The ADA starts asking me questions, and most of those were fairly unimportant.
This is a he or she?
She.
She.
Yeah,
Okay.
most of those are fairly unimportant. And so fast forward through all those questions they asked, you have to understand too that in a grand jury proceeding, only the prosecution is presenting. So they can spin anything the way they want.
You
and
don't
there's
get to
no
defend
objections.
yourself.
There's
Right.
no defense. There's no cross-examination. There's nothing like that.
That in and of itself, I know it's hard to believe that that's legal and that that's allowed in a country and state of law and order, supposedly, and of innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
But that, I would argue, that's something that needs to change in the state of Oklahoma, is that during a grand jury proceeding and during this type of investigation, you have no grounds to defend yourself or speak for yourself.
Yeah.
Or other than sharing your testimony, right?
And the reason why it was allowed is because a grand jury proceeding is just to get an indictment, meaning just to get charges.
Right.
It's not to get a conviction.
Right.
But either way, and so it's important to know, I forgot to mention this, but before I went in to testify, I had an encounter with the DA before, and before I went in to testify, I asked the DA, I said, hey, I know you love to show those pictures. So could you refrain from showing those pictures on the screen while I'm in there? Like if you want to show them before or after.
Pictures of Elijah. Because
I was like, if you want to show them, then show the jurors before or after. But if you show them while I'm in there, I'm going to kind of be an emotional mess and have a hard time testifying.
I'm sure that's what he wanted.
Right. And so I said, could you not do that? And he said, why would you care? It's not like it's anything worse than you look at an entomology class. So that right there, that comment, that right there shows his character. It shows the way he sees a child, right? An innocent infant, a precious baby who was the most important person in the world to me. And he's comparing their dead body to that of a cockroach, essentially.
Right.
Like,
and this is all off record, of course.
Right. But the ADA, the 2 ADAs, they were both there, and they kind of, even they looked kind of like surprised that he would say that.
So there were 2 other people, I mean,
and my lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
3 other people that witnessed the DA of Wagoner County say this to you.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I remember all 3 were very they couldn't believe he would say that.
Right.
They were like, and then when I reacted to it and I said, I didn't even say anything. I just looked stunned. He said, geez, sorry, just trying to break the ice. And those are exact quotes.
What a weirdo.
I know. What a strange guy. But these are exact quotes because I remember it so distinctly because it was so shocking.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of that very much gave me an idea of who he was as a person.
Right.
So then moving on into that's when I went in to testify afterwards.
Right.
And then asked all these questions. And the cool part of my testimony was that the jurors in a grand jury proceeding, this is the one part that I really like about a grand jury proceeding, is that the floor is opened for the jurors after questioning to ask any questions they want.
Oh, that's good though.
And as a witness, you actually get to long form answer questions.
So you can respond to them in that way.
Right. You can respond to them and you can't be interrupted. So unless it's like I'm sure there's some extreme rules set against that. But in general, in normal court and open court, they can kind of steer you and object, or they can, stay on track or answer the question. They don't do that in grand jury. So I got to freely speak. At least
not in Oklahoma, as far as I'm aware.
So I got to freely speak, which is really cool. And although my lawyer had kind of advised me and said, stay on topic.
Right.
Don't try to defend your parents. Just answer yes or no questions.
Right.
I was like, okay, but then I did the complete opposite. Right. And I got in there, and as soon as they asked questions and opened the floor, I was given all kinds of testimony about how, the medical examiner's office has an F rating and is unaccredited. And
you got to tell the jury this.
Yeah, and I told the jury that. And
of course the prosecution wasn't going to tell them this.
Right. And so that's what I said to the jurors, because one of the jurors asked me, they said, well, how do you explain this then?
Right.
And at the time, it would have been better had I had all of these experts that we got later on in the process.
Right.
Because this was still early on. But all these experts that came later in the process that gave us more evidence, I didn't have access to that stuff yet because they weren't a part of it yet. So I had limited information to defend with. But what I did have, I used, and I was like, well, they probably didn't tell you that the chief medical examiner's office has an F rating. They lost their accreditation, so they're not accredited. And I don't know who would go to a doctor that doesn't have an accreditation.
Right. Doesn't have to stay up to date with their information, education, and their qualifications.
Yeah, and their procedures, know. And so
there's no checks and balances if you're unaccredited, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. So there's that. And then I told them that. I also told them that, Elijah was discovered that he had pneumonia in his right lung. And that's important to note because a lot of infants die from pneumonia.
Yep.
I told them about the diapers and the constipation.
Extreme constipation.
Right.
But all of this, we have to keep in mind, all of this, the pneumonia, SIDS, the extreme constipation, is all being put up against a baby at 14 months old that is delayed in its development due to drug abuse in the womb.
He was born to a drug addict mom, so he's going to have...
Right.
He's not going to be as healthy as
far as
I
saw in the courtrooms and documents and everything, the prosecution didn't care about any of that.
No.
It did not support their chosen, predetermined narrative.
Yeah, correct. So anyway, I basically, without going too long on that, I basically answered their questions, and I was able to put that doubt in their head of this doesn't look right.
Right.
And then, I was asked several questions, which I thought were really awesome, and I really loved hearing the questions that they asked me and getting to answer them because it made me feel like I had a voice and I could actually talk. So obviously that grand jury did not go the way that the prosecution had intended.
Right.
They thought that they were going to win me over and get to break me and that I was going to work in their favor. And in reality, I got up there and I told the truth, and the truth did not fit their narrative. And so, they did not get the indictment. And as most people know, 99% of people get indicted in grand jury proceedings because they're one-sided.
99% in the favor of the prosecution.
Yeah.
These typically go.
Yeah. And my lawyer had told me.
You were in the 1%.
Yeah. My lawyer had told me, he said, and he kind of made a joke. He's like, the only people that don't get indicted are cops. So you will get indicted. No matter what, you're going to get indicted.
Just to let you know the reality of what he thought was going to happen.
Yeah. And we didn't get indicted because of my testimony. And my lawyer, when we left the courthouse, he said to me in the parking lot, he's like, you're a hard client. He's like, you didn't do anything I advised you to do. He said, but he said, I don't think I've ever been so proud of a client for not listening to me.
And what is your major at OSU at this time?
Nonprofit management.
Okay, so not a law student, to be clear.
Yeah, business student.
Because I'm sure in law school they would have taught you to do whatever he was saying.
Right, yeah. So he was like, you know what? You definitely didn't listen to me, but I'm so happy you didn't listen to me because he said that went so much better. He said, and he told me, if anybody doesn't get an indictment, it's going to be you.
Yeah.
You crushed that in there. He's like,
is that before he knew the results?
Yeah, this was before he knew the results. But he said, this was his exact quote. He said, you threw a grenade straight into the prosecution.
Yeah.
And gave real doubt because I provided evidence and facts.
Right.
So the grand jury proceeding is a really major part of my experience in all this.
Right.
Because I was the only one that was there to experience it.
Right.
Of all of us in the family. So that's the gist of all of that.
And I recall, if I'm correct in placing this correctly, you sat down with Clay Loney from Fox 23 and discussed a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, a little bit. I mostly went over my lawsuit.
Okay, so you filed a lawsuit.
Yeah, I filed a lawsuit. I don't know. I think it was my senior year of high school or of college. I'm sorry, my senior year of college.
Okay.
I filed a lawsuit. I think it was like 20.
So 3 or 4
21.
years into this.
Yeah. So I filed. It was like 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I filed about 2 years ago a lawsuit of my own, because you have to understand, at the time that Elijah passed, I was 17 still. So I was technically taken into DHS custody as well.
Right.
As a child in the house.
You were kept away from mom and dad.
Yeah. I was separated from them until I was 18. And by that point, they were already in jail. So I was still separated from them.
Right.
But I wasn't allowed to have any contact, I couldn't see them. I couldn't have a phone call, no text, nothing.
Right.
Because I was in protective custody as well.
Right.
So I filed the lawsuit partially because my civil rights were being violated, because I was kidnapped from my family and wrongfully taken away from them.
Right.
From false charges.
Now to a Fox 23 exclusive. A state representative from Stillwater says he believes this OSU student we told you about, Gabe Woolley, who filed a civil rights lawsuit last week against the Wagoner County sheriff, one of his detectives, and 2 others, alleging they were part of a conspiracy following the death of this baby boy she's holding, a conspiracy to fabricate and withhold evidence. This involves Gabe Woolley's 14-month-old nephew, Elijah, who died in his crib in Broken Arrow 3 years ago this month. Gabe's parents, Bill and Lisa Woolley, Elijah's legal guardians, were charged with murdering the child. But eventually, that case didn't hold up, and just last summer, those charges were dropped. Even so, Gabe's other nephew, a then 5-year-old who authorities took from the home after the death of his little brother, has never been allowed to return and remains with a foster family. We can't name him or show you his picture because of DHS privacy rules. But I can show you this letter from Representative John Talley, written March 11th, 1 year ago, to DHS Director Justin Brown. It says, as Vice Chairman of the Children, Youth, and Family Services Committee, I feel this case has been grossly mishandled. Justice is not being served in this case, and the child's well-being is suffering because of it. Michigan's DHHS has already agreed to take on the case if Oklahoma DHS is willing to relinquish it. There are 2 certified foster families eager and willing to welcome the child into their homes. Both foster families are relatives of the child. The letter was co-signed by 2 other state representatives, and yet all this time later, Representative Talley told me he has never gotten a response from Director Brown or from anyone with Oklahoma DHS.
This very private, secret proceeding.
As for Gloria, I talked with her on campus in Stillwater. She said those boys were her whole world, and that she's constantly haunted, thinking about her nephew's fear and confusion, abruptly taken from his home and cut off from his family.
Every day. Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine what he's going through. I mean, our family went through something tragic, doesn't begin to describe it. And what my parents went through with actually being in jail for 2 different stints, I can't imagine what they went through. And he went through the worst. You know, it always seems like my parents probably had it the worst, and by far, he has it the worst. He was taken from his family for years, with no support around him, with nothing, and I can't even begin to imagine how hard that is for him.
And he hasn't been able to see
No,
his family?
he has not.
Not even supervised visits?
Nope, nothing.
So you just disappeared?
Yep, he was just taken from our house one day, and that's it. And he, you know, yeah, there's not really good enough words to describe that. And I can't imagine how hard that is for him. I know it's almost unimaginable how hard it is for us. I can't imagine how hard it is for him. And, you know, the only thing that we can hope from all this is to one day have him back and try to make up for lost time. But it's been years, and I can't imagine what he thinks or what he's going through, and the trauma that he's endured it's unimaginable.
As I've reported, Wagoner County Sheriff Chris Elliott sent a statement saying he couldn't comment on the lawsuit other than the sheriff's office is reviewing, quote, what we believe to be a lawsuit full of baseless allegations. Finally, I received an email this week from Representative Talley saying, I just wanted to reach out and say something about Glory. I've known her for 4 years. We have worked Fellowship of Christian Athletes youth camps together. I have literally trusted my life in her hands. And I know that when she tells me something, it's truthful. I would love to see this resolved to protect her honor.
They don't see another option. Everyone's against them.
Glory says what she wants is for the truth to come out in federal court, for a judge to declare that the Wagoner County Sheriff's Office in this case has done great harm, and for her nephew to be reunited with his family. So I have also reached out to the DHS director since last March. No response. As for Bill and Lisa Woolley, they are scheduled for yet another hearing next month on lesser charges that the Wagoner County District Attorney's Office has completely changed or amended some 24 times since the murder charges were dropped. The Woolleys say the DA's office is just trying to make something stick. But Bill Woolley's attorney, during a hearing in December, put it stronger, saying, quote, I just want to go on the record and make sure at the appropriate time down the road that everyone recognizes what the state of Oklahoma is trying to do in this case in an effort to avoid a lack of evidence to support any allegations of criminal activity. Of course, I will continue to follow this closely.
Right.
Yeah, and that's still in pending and process in
this lawsuit is still pending.
It's yet to be heard in court.
Yeah,
even
it's
though
a very
been 2
slow
years.
process. The legal process is, I think that's more common knowledge to people.
Yeah,
But
it's not like the movies.
reality of it is your life kind of doesn't get to move forward when that's something that's taking place. But
Definitely.
So mom and dad are in jail now. Because they're in jail, and before they were in jail, you weren't allowed to have contact with them.
Yeah.
So what, just sort of briefly, what type of events and life events did mom and dad miss during the time they were in jail and kept away from you with DHS?
So I missed a lot of stuff. So I was 17 at the time. I was only a few weeks shy of 18 when this all happened, but I was still 17. And when they were arrested, they ended up missing, my high school graduation, which is a huge deal. And they ended up missing, I played rugby in high school. And so we won a state title my senior year. They weren't there for any of my rugby season.
This is Broken Arrow.
Yeah, for Broken Arrow High School. I won a national title while they were, my first national title while they were in jail, and they didn't get to see that either or be there for me. Yeah. It was hard going through all those events and having everyone else's parents there, and mine weren't. Prom, my parents weren't at my prom. They weren't, all these things that you would expect that your parents get to be there for. And they weren't there for that on my 18th birthday for any of these things. So I remember wearing my cap and gown on my visitation that I had after my graduation. So I went into Wagoner County Courthouse wearing my cap and gown so that my parents could see me in my cap and gown.
Right. I remember being there, seeing that mom is on the other side of the glass with the phone.
Yeah.
And then you are wearing your cap and gown on the other visitor side of the glass. And she did get to see that.
Yeah. And I did that for dad as well. Because visitation was weird because you only got 15 minutes of visitation. And that visitation was through glass and a phone. And it was only one inmate every weekend. Yeah. So if I saw mom one Sunday, then I couldn't see dad that Sunday too. I had to wait a whole week.
You had to choose between them.
You had to pick. So I basically it was 10 minutes every 2 weeks through phone and glass, and those minutes were split between me and you and Desiree and Rosie.
Yeah,
and Dave.
The inmate only gets those 10 to 15 minutes with all the visitors that come for them.
Right. So you get that very brief time. So it was hard because it was every 2 weeks I would get a couple minutes max, and I didn't get to touch or anything. It's just through glass. And
the best chance you have of some sort of longer contact is writing letters, which we talked about all the letters in Dad's episode of the Rescue Clayton podcast.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to volumes about the character and quality and relationships mom and dad have.
Definitely,
with the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty, it was pretty impactful the way that God was able to use them while in jail. Of course, they didn't deserve to be there, but him still being able to use them so well.
A greater purpose for it.
Yeah, Dad, they started Bible studies while they were in jail. They started, impacting the people around them, which was really cool.
And something that didn't take place during this time exactly, but it is related to, of course, mom struggled with her health while in Wagoner County and was denied the proper treatment or
medication.
I wouldn't say medication, like over-the-counter medication, but she was denied the treatment that her body was used to and that she needed.
Yeah.
And I think her health just sort of deteriorated altogether. In fact, when mom, before they went in and mom and dad came out, they looked like they aged significantly. They lost a ton of weight, but they looked like they aged significantly.
For sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people have said that too. From the time that before all this happened until they came out of jail, just in that 8-month span of the total 8 months they were in jail, they look like they aged like 10 years. Like, it's crazy to see the way that, that trauma and stress will age the body and stuff. But yeah, mom, she went under, she's always had a heart condition, for as long as we've been alive.
And this ultimately ended up leading to mom having a heart attack.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I don't have the medical proof of it, but I believe that the stress and the amount of anxiety with things, and she had a weak heart, but I would not be surprised to find out this expedited her health
every
and
doctor,
the possibility of this heart attack that she had.
I think all of her cardio specialists have said that it would, she's told them about a little bit of what she's gone through, and they've all said that, like, it would be crazy to think this wasn't a trigger.
To your recollection, yeah.
Yeah, so, like, definitely, like, the amount of stress that she went under and, like, from this process is definitely, I mean, we've speculated is what has caused this heart attack. So she had a heart attack. It's been probably 2 years now, something like that.
What was it like seeing mom in the hospital during the process of this heart attack?
Yeah. After
all these visits in jail and everything, more sort of caution tape or ropes and obstacles put between you and your parents to have a normal life.
Yeah. So mom actually missed my college graduation too
because of the heart
attack. She had the heart attack like 2 weeks before my college graduation, so she was in the hospital still. So not only did she miss my high school graduation, but she also missed my college graduation. And although it may not be as directly correlated to the charges, we believe that it was a trigger from that. So it was an aftershock effect.
Anyone that can put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah. So in a way, this also caused her to miss that, and so that was pretty devastating. And in general, like, having that fear of, like, she could die. I mean, her doctors gave her the pamphlets for hospice. They said she was going to die. So like, that was a pretty traumatic thing. And
my understanding is they had to restart her heart 12 times.
Yeah. So I was there that day when that happened. So,
so lots of traumatic scenarios that you witnessed firsthand, seeing it happen. Desiree witnessed some of those as well. Yeah. And I think there was just a level of trauma for everyone, but ultimately I can't imagine, and I do my best to imagine and to empathize with the trauma that Clayton has gone through and is still going through.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the big thing too, is like, as much as like we get to talk and share our story about like what we've been through and the traumas that we've endured through this time, like, none of it compares to Clayton. Like, to be taken from your whole family at 5 and like ripped
a healthy,
away.
Stable home at 5 years old. Now he's 10.
Yeah.
And just I mean, I look at my students in the classroom and I'm semi-aware of their backgrounds and their behaviors, and I can't help but think that nothing is for no reason. Behaviors exhibit themselves for a reason, and I can only imagine what Clayton's expressions are to his classmates, to his teachers, and the new habits he's created because of this trauma, this being separated from his home. And now charges have been dropped against mom and dad because of lack of evidence and because there was no crime. But Clayton was taken because of those charges. Charges are dropped, and DHS has not returned him. Yeah. Just even though the reason he was removed was because of the charges, which now don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an incredible thing to think about. And like, through all this time, it's like we can only grieve and process so much with him still being gone. He's our missing piece, like, it's like you take the most, we lost Elijah and he passed away, but at least we know he's in a better place.
Right.
And, with Clayton, like, we don't know if we actually know he's not safe where he's at, and so like,
from what I have heard and what I know, and from my perspectives, that he has continued to be in a state of trauma. I would argue, from what I've heard, he's currently not in a safe placement by DHS.
Yeah, he's not. I mean, we had the neighbors.
And the reason we would know some of this, the birth mother, Desiree, does get to have access to him. I don't get to, you don't get to, but she does get to have or has had some conversations with Clayton.
Well, that's important to clarify on that. She does not have access to him.
Right.
She's had very, very, very limited, like, as in 2 to 3.
Over a computer.
Over a computer, she has gotten to
Conversations,
say something over a
interactions.
computer screen.
Right.
So
But from that little piece of information, it has become clear it doesn't seem like the best environment for Clayton.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely not. So, but that's not really the main reason that we know that Clayton's not safe. Like,
Right.
we put up yard signs and billboards and stuff all over and canvass the surrounding town and city, greater Tulsa area, where this all took place in Broken Arrow. And we've canvassed the area as well as, around where Clayton lives and stuff, because he still lives in town. And, on there is a link to our website, which is rescueclayton.com.
Right.
And on there's a place for people to get in touch with us and send us an email. And the people that apparently are the neighbors of the foster home where Clayton currently lives,
Right.
they emailed us and they told us that Clayton has run away multiple times, that he plays with their son, and that he's ran over to their house and told them that he's being locked up and not able to play with kids.
Right.
That
The police
he's being basically abused, and he's being
The police
mistreated.
even had to find him and bring him home.
Yeah, that the police had to find him multiple times, bring him home, and that not only did we report this to DHS and sent this, tip that we received off to DHS, but the person who made the tip was also willing to make a legal statement, testifying to that.
And he's the one that actually heard this straight from Clayton's mouth.
Yeah, he heard this
The
straight from
neighbor.
his mouth. Yeah, and so that he's not safe where he's at, and DHS and the police department, they didn't care. They looked right past that to
Right.
find more information about us, and so that's really telling about that. They don't care about his well-being. They don't.
Or this
care.
is sort of blind trust. Well, some sort of officials, whether Wagoner County or DHS, have dealt with this, so we're gonna, then that's a done deal.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We forget that inside of these entities and these organizations and these operations are human beings themselves that are capable of mistakes,
Yeah.
bias, and wrongdoings. And there's
For
no
sure.
account. It doesn't seem to be accountability for it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is there has to be checks and balances and accountability for these systems at place. You can't just have people have power without limitation
Right.
and have power without checks and balances, because now you have situations like this that happen where one detectives, and I'm sure you probably will get into this more on, Desiree's podcast or Mary Beth's podcast episode, but about his bias and the detective's bias.
Yeah.
And because you have one biased detective who, from his personal life's trauma,
Right.
has projected a scenario that didn't happen.
And
onto
everyone
our
that
family.
follows him believes him without questioning
Yeah.
simply because of the title he holds.
Yeah. And so then you have this trickle down effect of, like, because of one person's malice and
Yeah.
malpractice, it trickles down to everyone blindly trusting them, from the sheriff trusting him
Yep.
to the sheriff, then the DA trusts the sheriff, and then the judges trust the DA. And then it all just trickles down to where now you have a system where you can't climb out of this hole that
is.
they dug for you.
It is the system, the state, and all the state's monies and money and resources against the individual,
Yeah.
a citizen.
For sure.
And so the last thing that we kind of want to do here is we always have the person take their mic with them and turn it, look at the cameras if you were talking to Clayton directly, and leave a message for Clayton. So thank you everyone for listening to the Rescue Clayton podcast. I'm here with Glory Woolley, Clayton's biological aunt and former caretaker. And for more information, you can go to rescueclayton.com. You can learn about the Saving Clayton documentary there with Red River TV and Project 46, and more about the podcast. So thank you for being here, Glory.
Yeah.
And Clayton, this is a message for you from your aunt, Glory.
Yeah. So we love you, and that's like the most important thing that we want to say is how much we love you, and that hopefully you're able to look back on this and everything from the documentary to the podcast and everything in between, and know that we never stopped fighting for you through this time, that your uncle and I and your grandma, grandpa, and your mom and everyone else, that your family's fighting for you, and we love you, and that we won't stop with these efforts until you're home. And even once you are home, that we're going to make sure that your name carries on to help other people like you, that what you've gone through and what we've gone through is going to have a greater purpose. And so we love you, and we know that we won't stop fighting for you until we get you back, until you're back in our arms. And I think that's always what we want to make sure that you know, is how much we love you and are fighting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uncle Gabe, you be staying at the house and eat pancakes with us in the daytime. And I love you.